As a kid, I went camping maybe a handful of times, usually either with friends or with Girl Scouts, but most of my camping career has been as an adult, usually by myself. This means I'm pretty self-taught. When I get interested in something new, I do a lot of research beforehand, but some things you just learn with experience. So now that I feel I'm a confident camper, I thought I would share with you 10 things I wish I knew before I started camping. I do still plan on doing like a whole how to plan your first camping trip video, but that's likely going to take a lot longer to record because I plan to do it as like walking through planning one of my camping trips. So it's coming, but it's going to take a little while. So for the purpose of this video, when I say camping, I'm referring to car camping, not necessarily sleeping in your car, but like driving up to your campsite as opposed to like backcountry camping. I will likely do a similar backcountry camping video at some point, but as far as like tips go and things I wish I knew beforehand, they're two different things in my opinion. So the first thing is, you actually need very little gear to get started. So a lot of people who are into camping love talking about gear. They love looking at the latest and greatest gear, but that doesn't mean you need all that to get started. You don't need a whole new camp cook set. You can just bring your cookware from home. And that's true for a lot of things. You don't need a sleeping bag. You can bring your blankets from home. Same with a pillow. Now you do want to keep in mind what temperatures you're sleeping in, but if you're just getting started, you're probably sleeping in somewhat warm temperatures anyway. As far as a sleeping pad goes, you can either get a really cheap one for like under $30, or you can just bring more blankets and sleep on top of them. It probably won't be your best night of sleep ever, but if you don't want to invest the money yet because you're not really sure if you're going to like camping, that is an option. Same with clothes. You'll want clothing that will keep you comfortable in the environment, but you don't need like a super expensive raincoat or anything like that. Another big piece of gear is a tent, and depending on what campsite you choose, that might actually be a necessity. Some campgrounds have a rule that you need to have a tent set up, but if this is the case, you can try either borrowing one from a friend or possibly renting one. So once you're sure you're interested in camping, my second tip is to look for used gear. When I first started camping, I wasn't aware of how much used gear is actually available. I made a whole other video a year or two ago about where to find used gear, and I'll link that down below. But the short version is, it kind of depends on where you live. If you live in a really outdoorsy area, it'll be easier to find stuff local to you. You can check your regular local thrift stores, or sometimes there are specific outdoor gear consignment stores. Where I lived before, there weren't any near me, but where I live now, I can think of 4 within about an hour and a half of me. If local isn't an option, there are multiple websites you can look at. One of my favorites online is Gear Trade, but you can also try like eBay as well. So my third tip is also gear related, and that's that quilts exist. I'm not talking about like a regular quilt you might already have at your house. I'm talking about specific camping quilts. They're usually made out of the same materials as your typical sleeping bag, but depending on how you sleep, they may be more comfortable. I started camping, I think around 7-ish years ago, and I'm not sure if at that time they weren't as popular or if I was just unaware of them, but at the time I bought a sleeping bag, and now I'm looking for a quilt. If you're someone like me who rolls around a lot, a quilt might be a better option for you. My fourth tip is where to find campsites. When I first started camping, my go-to was just to Google where I wanted to go and add campground. And that does still work, but there are some other more specific options you can look at. I'd say the top 3 that I use now are The Dirt, recreation.gov, and state park websites. You can also browse around on Gaia GPS and the Forest Service website to look for more options. Another one that I haven't used, so I can't fully recommend, is HipCamp. They're more of like an Airbnb meets campground though. So instead of like an official campsite, it's more like people who have some extra land and built campsites. And much like Airbnb, that can be kind of hit or miss. There can be some very nice options on HipCamp, especially if you're into glamping, but they usually charge a premium for it. And for any campsite you plan on going to, I suggest looking at reviews beforehand. Tip number 5, camping meals don't have to be complicated. When I first started camping, I remember looking for like camping specific meals, and I'm not entirely sure why I thought that was necessary. You can just eat the same things you eat back home, or even simpler things if you prefer. My favorite go-tos for breakfast are oatmeal or granola, depending if I want to cook or not, and both of those can be prepared beforehand. Simple dinner options include things like sandwiches or like box mac and cheese, or any other like box pasta dish. You can also do like all your meal prepping at home and then just heat things up when you get to camp. Related to food, tip number 6. Now you definitely don't need to bring a cooler, but if you do, I highly suggest pre-cooling it. This is something I didn't know was a thing when I started camping, but it really helps your food stay cold longer. If you have a cold place to set your cooler before you start packing it up, you can just leave it there and that will help cool it down. If you don't have a spot like that, you can get like an extra bag of ice or just use like frozen water bottles or something like that to bring the temperature of the inside of the cooler down. And then when you pack your food, the ice that you put in it isn't going towards cooling down the cooler. Related to that, I usually like to freeze an extra bottle of water and stick that in as an ice pack. It helps keep things cool, and then like mid-camping trip, I have some nice cold water I can drink too. Also, if you're going with either like a large group of people or for a long amount of time, it's worth it to bring 2 separate coolers, one for food and one for drinks. That way, whenever someone goes to get a drink, they're not opening the cooler and letting warmth in that way. Tip number 7. Now, I did mention this in my last video, but I think it's worth repeating, and based on my analytics, most people who view my videos are new to the channel anyway. So tip number 7 is everything is so much louder at night. If you hear something that you think is like a deer walking around at night, it's probably just a squirrel. So yeah, just be aware that everything is louder at night. Tip number 8 is only important if you're going with a group as opposed to like solo camping, but it's important enough to mention. And I think a lot of people who are new to camping tend to go with a group for the first time. So it's important to be on the same page as your group. There are a lot of different types of camping, and just because a group of people decide that they're going to go camping together does not mean they all have the same thing in mind. One person might want to wake up early and spend most of the day hiking. Someone else might want to sleep in and just hang out and read a book. Both are fine options, but you want to be on the same page. And that page may be, we're gonna do our own thing, and that's fine, as long as everyone's aware of the expectations. So tip number 9 is something to be aware of when you're shopping for gear, and that's that you wanna understand what R value is for a sleeping pad. R value relates to how much or how little heat is lost from your body, like into the ground. The lower the number, the more heat you're gonna lose. The higher the number, the more heat you'll retain. So if you plan on doing any cold weather camping, you're gonna want a higher R value. If you're only gonna camp in the summer or when it's warm, then it's less of a concern. Tip number 10 is to expect worse weather than what's predicted. So to be fair, all of my camping experience has been on the east coast of the US, either the northeast or the southeast. So it may be different in different parts of the world, but I'm guessing it's not that different and that the weather forecast cannot be trusted. So especially with car camping where you have the opportunity to bring extra stuff and you don't have to like carry it on your back, be prepared for some less than ideal conditions. There is a decent chance it's either going to be colder or warmer than what's predicted. There's also almost like a rule that even if it says it's not going to rain, it's going to rain on your camping trip, at least in the southeast. And weather can be very different even like in the same area. It could be perfectly clear at my house and like downpouring across town. So make sure to bring something in case of rain, in case of cold, and in case of heat. I don't personally do this because I don't think it's worth it for me, but some people will bring like an easy up that they can set up, and then even if it is raining, they can still be outside without getting drenched. Then I don't know if this fully counts as a tip, but here's like a bonus number 11. My first time ever camping by myself, for whatever reason, I left my lighter out overnight on the picnic table, and then it downpoured, even though it said it wasn't going to, and then the next day when I went to use my lighter, it didn't work anymore. Luckily, I tend to overpack, especially if I'm car camping, because I can just bring extra stuff. So I had another lighter, so it wasn't a big deal, but yeah, don't leave your lighter out overnight. Also, that same camping trip, a skunk tried to steal my cookie. So yeah, that's why rangers say, like, don't leave food out unattended. It wasn't unattended, so the skunk did not get away with my cookie. But based on how fast he showed up and tried to steal it, I'm certain the skunk had been fed before. If you're brand new to camping, feel free to leave any questions you have down below. And if you've been camping before, what's something you wish you knew before you started camping? Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to be always adventuring.